In 17th century Europe, the Habsburg royal family was entwined in a mix of political power and personal tragedy. Maria Theresa was born in Spain in 1638. At just 6 years old, she lost her mother and brother, suddenly becoming the heir to the Spanish throne. Despite being raised amidst strict Catholic education and the splendor of the royal court, her life was far from happy. In 1660, she married Louis XIV of France in a union meant to secure peace between the two kingdoms. However, the couple's close blood relation as double first cousins affected the health of their children. Of her 6 children, only her firstborn son survived. Louis XIV's numerous affairs and the intrigues of the royal court made Maria Theresa's life even more difficult. She died in 1683 at the age of 44 due to complications from medical treatment. Meanwhile, Anna of Austria was born in 1549. Initially, she was meant to marry her first cousin Don Carlos, but his unexpected death shattered those plans. Later, in 1570, Anna married her uncle, Philip II of Spain. This unconventional and politically motivated marriage made Anna's life complex and uncertain. The lives of these two women illustrate how politics, dynastic diplomacy, and inbreeding shape their personal happiness in the course of history. Maria Theresa's descendants united the French and Spanish royal lines, while Anna's marriage reflected the internal conflicts of the Habsburg family. Habsburg's reign could endure. After Margaret's death, her rights to the Spanish throne were passed to her only surviving daughter, Maria Antonia. When Maria Antonia herself died in 1692, her rights were inherited by her only surviving son, Prince Joseph Ferdinand of Bavaria. However, Joseph Ferdinand's untimely death in 1699, coupled with King Charles II's failure to produce an heir, would trigger a succession crisis that plunged Spain and all of Europe into a brutal war that lasted nearly 15 years. A crisis that perhaps could have been avoided if the Habsburgs hadn't destroyed themselves from within due to their ancestrous practices. We are staying in the 17th century for our next story to look at a princess who hated her life once she became queen. Maria Theresa of Spain was born on the 10th of September 1638 at the Escorial Palace outside Madrid. Her father was Philip IV, King of Spain since 1621, and ruler of the largest colonial empire ever seen in history up to that time, stretching from Mexico in the north-south to Chile and Argentina. Her mother was Elizabeth of France, a daughter of King Henry IV of France and a brother of King Louis XIII, the ruler of France at the time of Maria Theresa's birth. Maria Theresa's parents had many children, but tragically, nearly all of them died in infancy. Only one of her 4 siblings, Balthasar Charles, lived beyond infancy. But he, too, was taken too soon. In 1644, when Maria Theresa was just 6 years old, her mother Elizabeth died from complications after another miscarriage. Then 2 years later, her older brother, aged just 16 years old, also passed away. This loss carved out a deep void in the young infant's heart, and with her brother's death, she suddenly became the heir to the Spanish throne. After the deaths of her mother and brother, the young infant drew closer to her father, who ensured she received a strict Catholic Counter-Reformation education. Taught by distinguished scholars, she studied Latin and other subjects, while her father personally introduced her to politics and history. Yet her upbringing was not without warmth. She was surrounded by pets, entertainers, and the splendor of the Spanish court. This court, one of the most magnificent in the world, was enriched by wealth from the Americas and graced by cultural figures such as a painter, Diego Velázquez, providing Maria Theresa with an extraordinary environment in which to grow. Yet, Philip understood that no matter how well educated, a daughter's soul could ignite unrest and threaten the very stability of the monarchy. Because of this, in 1649, he remarried, this time to his own niece, 14-year-old Mariana of Austria. She gave birth to 2 sons, one of which, Charles or Carlos, born in 1661, would live into adulthood. This half-brother replaced Maria Theresa as the direct heir to their father and would succeed as King Carlos II in 1665. To understand the way in which Infanti's life would play out, we need to understand the horrendous diplomatic relationship between Spain and France in the early modern era. Both France and Spain only began to take shape as unified kingdoms in the 15th century. Before this, Spain was divided into realms such as Castile, Leon, and Aragon, while France was emerging from feudal fragmentation and the Hundred Years' War. With consolidation, They rose to become the most powerful kingdoms in Western Europe. In 1494, France invaded the Italian peninsula, where Spain held extensive territories in the south. This sparked a bitter rivalry between the two powers that raged for more than 150 years. Spain and France were locked in the Italian Wars for 65 years, ending in 1559 with Spain victorious and dominant in Italy, ruling Sardinia, Sicily, Naples, and Milan. Soon after, France was torn apart by its wars of religion, during which Spain intervened on behalf of the Catholic League, sending troops into France in the 1580s and 1590s. After peace returned in 1598, a brief pause followed before the two powers clashed again, this time on opposite sides of the 30 Years' War that broke out in 1618. During this, their rivalry extended into northern Italy over the Duchy of Manura and into Spain's own territories, as France supported rebellions in Portugal and Catalonia in the 1640s. In many ways, the Franco-Spanish rivalry defined Western Europe's international politics from the 1490s until the 1650s. That is, until Maria Theresa's marriage to Louis XIV was organized. The conflict between France and Spain was so bitter that even after the rest of Europe's major powers made peace with one another and ended the 30 Years' War in 1648, the French and Spanish kept fighting. But by the 1650s, the Spanish were worn out. They lost control of Portugal, which they had acquired at the end of the 1590s, and which now once again became an independent nation, and they only barely quelled the rebellion in Catalonia. Thus, on the 7th of November 1659, they agreed to the Treaty of the Pyrenees with France, which was signed on the mountain border between the two nations. Under the terms of the treaty, Spain would cede territory in the Spanish Netherlands to the French, and there was also a marriage alliance put in place to cement the new peace. Under the terms, Philip IV agreed to marry his daughter, Maria Theresa, to the King of France, Louis I, XIV. The idea was that after 165 years of almost constant war between the French and the Spanish, the marriage alliance would lead to a more lasting peace. Spain in particular needed such an arrangement as their coffers were empty and they were a declining power as a result of the costly wars which they'd fought perpetually throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Although the Treaty of the Pyrenees was agreed to in November 1659, the formal signing of meeting between the two monarchs occurred on the 7th of June 1660. Maria Theresa accompanied her father and a large entourage of Spanish cities and ministers who headed to the Pyrenees to sign the treaty there on the island of Fiescence, a tiny island on the river of Bidassawa on the border. There she met her future husband, who was already signaling his intent to rule as an absolutist monarch, rejecting reliance on Parliament and presenting himself as God's chosen representative to govern France. When Louis first saw his future bride, he would have noticed a small, plump woman with fair skin and blonde hair, well within the beauty standards of the time. Unlike many Habsburgs, she had not inherited the pronounced facial features caused by generations of inbreeding, thanks mainly to her mother. However, she did have poor teeth, a result of her love for sweets and hot chocolate. Curiously, the pair, both 21 years old, were nearly the exact same age. Louise was born on September 5, 1638, just 5 days before Maria Theresa. By the time they met, Louis had already been King of France for 17 years, having inherited the throne in 1643 when he wasn't even 5. After the meeting on the island of Fiescence, the betrothed couple crossed the border. There, Maria Theresa bid her father a final heartbreaking farewell, both aware they would never meet again. In parting, Philip IV reminded his daughter of her new destiny. "You must forget that you were an infant and remember only that you were Queen of France." On the 9th of June 1660, they married at the small town of Saint-Jean-d'Eux in French territory, making Maria Theresa Queen Consort of France. They then progressed north slowly over the summer and only made their ceremonial entry into Paris on the 26th of August 1660, during which the people of the French capital turned out in great numbers to welcome their new queen. A strange element of Maria Theresa's marriage, which should be noted, is that she was marrying her double first cousin. Despite the hostile relationship between France and Spain over the years, the pair were closely related. Louis's mother was Anne of Austria. Anne's father was Philip III of Spain, Maria Theresa's grandfather. Moreover, because of the severe inbreeding between the Spanish and Austrian royal houses, two separate branches of the House of Habsburg, Maria Theresa was related to Louis and other tangled ways. To compound matters on her direct family side, Maria Theresa's mother, Elizabeth, was Louis XIV's aunt. So both were the product of Europe's royal inbreeding, and this incestuous union would only further it. Luckily, though, their children escaped the crippling inbreeding that plagued other Spanish and Austrian Habsburgs. But it may have affected them in other ways, as we shall see. Maria Theresa became pregnant for the first time within a few months of marrying Louis. On the 1st of November 1661, less than 17 months after their wedding, she gave birth to their first child, a boy who the names Louis after his father. He would live a reasonably healthy and long life. Maria Theresa was not so lucky with her subsequent children, though. Two daughters, Anne Elizabeth and Maria Anne, were born in November 1662 and November 1664. In a tragic coincidence, both died after 6 weeks in late December 1662 and late December 1664. A third child, christened as Marie Thérèse, after her mother lived until she was 5 years old. But she too was claimed in March 1672 from what is believed to have been tuberculosis. Two further sons, Philippe Charles and Louis François, were born in 1668 and 1672, and both also died in infancy. Therefore, of the 6 children Maria Theresa gave birth to, only one, her firstborn, survived to become an adult. While high infant mortality was common in the 17th century, as seen even in Queen Anne of Great Britain's tragic experiences, Maria Theresa's losses were especially severe. Her children's frailty may have been owed not only to the era's medical limits, but also to her deeply inbred lineage and her marriage to a double first cousin, which compounded those hereditary weaknesses. Maria Theresa's reign as Queen Consort of France was a peculiar one. She was well liked by her husband in the court, and was described as charitable, superstitious, and devotedly in love with her husband. She did everything she could to please him, adopting the fashions of the French court and participating in balls and spectacles despite her natural shyness. She spent her free time surrounded by her ladies and waiting from Spain, her dwarfs, her little dogs, and her beloved chocolate. She was also known to frequently wear high heels to compensate for her small stature, but she was clumsy and often fell over. Yet her devotion was tested daily. Louis, a serial philanderer, maintained a string of mistresses both in Paris and later at the newly built Palace of Versailles. Maria Theresa despised many of these, and she often wept in private. But she turned a careful blind eye, never publicly confronting him. To try and make up in part for his infidelities, Louis frequently staged performances of comedy, particularly Spanish comedy, which he knew she loved. Surrounded by a court full of French aristocrats, Maria Theresa formed a close bond with her mother-in-law, Anne of Austria, the widow of Louis XIII, and her Habsburg cousin. With Anne, Maria Theresa could speak Spanish, pray, visit churches, and perform charitable works away from the prying eyes of the French court. She affectionately called her Dia, but Anne's death in January 1666 was a devastating loss, removing a key ally and protector. After Anne's passing, Louis no longer bothered to hide his affairs, especially after falling under the spell of Madame d'Antaspe in the autumn of 1666. Beyond this, her primary role as queen consort was to try and mediate relations between France and Spain. Her husband was determined to expand his kingdom and ultimately aimed to extend the eastern border all the way to the River Rhine in the Netherlands and western Germany. This would necessarily bring France into conflict again with Spain, which still controlled the Spanish Netherlands, which basically overlapped with modern-day Belgium. The Spanish also controlled the Franche, or Free Country, in what is now eastern France. Maria Theresa was placed in a very difficult position in May 1667 when her husband went to war with her native country to try and claim these lands. The War of Devolution was ultimately a short conflict in which the French overran the Spanish Netherlands. By May 1668, peace terms were patched up whereby Spain ceded a large chunk of the Spanish Netherlands to France. The peace terms may have been even more punitive for the Spanish had Maria Theresa not been able to moderate her husband's demands. Maria Theresa would not live to be an elderly woman. In July 1683, she developed a severe abscess in her armpit. A fever then rose, and her physicians opted for the standard medical procedure at the time of bloodletting. The incision may have struck a large vein or artery, and she died from the procedure on the 30th of July at 44 years of age. Her last words were, "Since I have been queen, I have had only one happy day." Louis XIV soon married one of his long-standing mistresses in private, though the marriage was never made public and they didn't have any legitimate children. This meant that Maria Theresa's sole surviving child remained the only heir to the throne. The Grand Da, or Great Prince as he was known, lived down to 1711. However, he failed to outlive his own father, Louis XIV, who lived to 1715. In the end, when he died, it was a great-grandson of Maria Theresa, the Grand Da's grandson, who succeeded as King Louis X, the 15th. The direct line of the Spanish royal family died out in 1700, when Maria Theresa's half-brother, Carlos II, died in his late 30s, in part owing to health complications brought about by severe inbreeding. When he passed away, Philip of Anjou, a son of the Grand Alan and grandson of Maria Theresa, succeeded as King Philip V of Spain. Thus, Maria Theresa's marriage to Louis XIV in 1660 not only helped cement peace between France and Spain. 40 years later, it saw a member of the French royal family succeed as King of Spain. For our fourth tale, we are going back to the mid-6th century. Anna of Austria was born on the 2nd of November 1549 at Celis, near Valladolid in Spain. Her father was a future Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II, a son of Ferdinand I, the Archduke of Austria and King of Hungary, Bohemia, and Croatia, who became the Holy Roman Emperor in 1556. Maximilian would inherit his father's vast titles upon his death in 1564, cementing his place among Europe's most powerful rulers. Although Anna was from an Austrian family, she was born in Spain because of an extended visit to the country by her father, who in 1548 had married Maria, a daughter of none other than Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, and the most dominant monarch in all of Europe. As you might have suspected, and his parents were closely related. They were first cousins, as their fathers Charles V and Ferdinand I were brothers. Both members of the illustrious House of Habsburg, her parents' marriage marked one of the earliest intermarriages between the Austrian and Spanish branches of the Habsburg dynasty, an alliance forged for political strength, but one that would over the following century contribute to the genetic inbreeding that came to plague the family line. Anna spent her earliest years amid the splendor of the Spanish court, surrounded by ceremony, power, and the grandeur of empire. The eldest of 9 children who survived infancy, she quickly became her father's cherished favorite. During these years, her mother, Maria, governed Spain as regent alongside her new husband, Maximilian, while her own father, the mighty Charles V, was occupied in Central Europe, waging his relentless campaign to suppress the Protestant Reformation in Germany. Maria's regency lasted until 1551, when her brother Prince Philip returned from Central Europe to assume control as acting ruler in their father's absence. With Philip now in charge, Anna's parents were free to return to Austria, where Anna was raised and educated amid the grandeur of Vienna throughout the 1550s. Though she was too young to remember her early years in Spain, those at court could never forget the imperial child who had been born among them, an infant princess whose destiny was already entwined with the great powers of Europe. Before delving deeper into Anna's life and the strange, fateful marriage that would define it, we need to understand the turbulent world in which her story unfolded. 16th century Europe looked very different than today, with competing powers, shifting alliances, and dramatic politics. Germany was not yet a single nation, but a mix of hundreds of small states, duchies, and free cities under the loose framework of the Holy Roman Empire. To the east stretched the vast Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while Italy was divided into dozens of rival states, including the Papal States, the Republic of Venice, and a host of other duchies constantly fighting for dominance. Amid this fragmented landscape, 2 titans stood out from the rest, the kingdoms of Spain and France. Locked in a bitter struggle for European supremacy, they had waged a relentless series of wars from 1494 to 1559 over control of Italy. For Spain, maintaining a close bond with the Austrian branch of the Habsburg family was vital in keeping French ambitions in check. By the late 1560s, this alliance had become more crucial than ever. A fierce revolt had erupted in the Low Countries around one day Belgium and the Netherlands, threatening Spanish control of one of its richest territories. As King Philip II sought to preserve this piece of his empire, he looked to strengthen his ties with his Austrian kin, and out of this web of dynastic necessity and political strategy would emerge the marriage that shaped in destiny. Initially, Anna was never meant to marry Philip at all. So, how did this come about? The Habsburg courts of Madrid and Vienna had a different union in mind, one that would strengthen family and empire alike. The plan was for Anna to wed her first cousin, Don Carlos, Prince of Asturias, the only son of King Philip II, and his first wife, Maria Manuela of Portugal. By the standards of royal Europe, such a match was hardly shocking. Marriages between cousins were common tools of diplomacy designed to bind kingdoms together in loyalty and blood, a tradition that would persist in European royalty well into the 20th century. Don Carlos and Ana were even close in age, with Carlos only being 4 years her senior, a pairing that seemed on paper, at least both politically and personally well matched. Ana, however, was far from Don Carlos's only prospect. As early as 1559, while Spain and France were negotiating to end the long Italian wars, plans were made for Carlos to marry a French princess. That same year, he became engaged to Elizabeth of Valois, the eldest daughter of King Henry II of France. Yet, in a twist of dynastic diplomacy, Elizabeth was hastily married to Philip himself as part of a broader effort to secure peace between the two rival kingdoms. 3 other brides were then proposed for the young prince, including another French candidate, but France soon descended into the wars of religion between Catholics and Protestants, causing those plans to collapse. By the mid-560s, with foreign matches no longer viable, it was finally agreed that Don Carlos would marry his cousin Anna. All was not well in Spain, though. While Anna grew into her teenage years in Vienna believing that she would marry her cousin in a few years' time, events hundreds of kilometers away were taking a darker turn. Don Carlos, once a promising heir, had been plagued by fevers and mysterious health problems since his mid-teens. Then in 1562, he suffered a head injury after falling down a staircase, and despite a series of bizarre and often brutal medical treatments, his psychological state began to deteriorate. By the time he reached his 20s, Don Carlos was infamous for violent emotional outbursts, erratic behavior, and alarming instability. His actions became ever more dangerous. He secretly reached out to opponents of his father's rule, including the Dutch rebels in the Low Countries. Alarmed by his reckless defiance, Philip II took drastic action and had his own son arrested in early 1568. With that, any hope of a marriage between Anna and Don Carlos was abruptly and irrevocably shattered. On the 24th of July, 1568, Don Carlos died while imprisoned. To this day, suspicions linger on, with many believing his father starved him to death, determined to prevent his son from becoming a rallying point for rebellion. Yet, while this disaster ended one potential union, it did not distinguish the idea of Anna marrying within her Habsburg family. Instead, the plan would take a dark and unexpected turn, setting the stage for one of the most extraordinary marriages of the era. When Don Carlos died in the summer of 1568, Philip II was a married man, though his current wife was his third. His first wife, Don Carlos's mother, Maria Manuela of Portugal, had died 4 days after giving birth to him from severe bleeding following labor. Philip's second wife, Mary Chuda, Queen of England and Ireland, had died from suspected stomach or uterine cancer in 1558, and they had no children. He then married Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess, in 1560. After a complex natal history, she died after a stillbirth on the 3rd of October, 1568, 10 weeks after Don Carlos's death. All of this left Philip II in a desperate position. He had lost both his heir and his wife. His third marriage had produced only daughters, and with the deaths of Don Carlos and Elizabeth of Valois in quick succession, the king found himself without a male successor. And so, in a move that shocked Europe, Philip proposed the unthinkable. If Don Carlos could no longer marry Anna, then perhaps he himself should marry his niece. Astonishingly, Anna's father agreed. Thus, 20-year-old Anna married her 43-year-old uncle by proxy in May 1570, while she was still in Vienna, defying not only convention, but also the objections of Pope Pius V, who was appalled by Philip's plans to marry his niece. Until now, Anna's union with Philip had existed only on paper, married by proxy while she remained in Austria, and he ruled from Spain. In the autumn of 1570, though, it was finally time for her to travel to the Iberian Peninsula, where a grand, formal ceremony awaited. She traveled with a large retinue, a mix of familiar faces from Vienna who would now accompany her to Spain and remain by her side. a common practice among royal courts to provide continuity and comfort for brides whose lives were suddenly uprooted and sent to live in a foreign land. The journey to Spain was long and fraught with tension. Anna's party.